Hello, I am Dr. David Clark. I lecture in historical theology at the University of Roehampton in London. And today we'll be talking about the number one problem that students face when using AI for biblical interpretation. Now, I think many of us will be aware that there's a bit of fear out there around the use of AI for studying the Bible. And if you just do a quick search on YouTube, the dangers of using AI for studying the Bible, you will see that there is quite a bit of material out there on this topic. Personally, I've found that using AI can be really helpful for biblical studies if you know how to do it in the right way. The number one problem when we use AI for biblical studies is not that AI generators like ChatGPT or Google Gemini are giving us wrong answers. A lot of times when I ask questions, the answers that these generators are giving me are actually very, very good. The problem is not that we're being given wrong answers. The problem is that too many students of the Bible are letting AI do their thinking for them. AI must be the servant. We can use AI as a companion and as a support as we seek to examine, to expand, to articulate, and to defend our knowledge and our understanding of what the Bible says. In this micro lesson, we're going to look at 4 points. First, I'm going to give an example of a really challenging question that emerges from our study of the Old Testament. Second, I'm going to show you a worst case scenario on how students are using AI in an abusive and incredibly unhelpful way. Third, I'm going to really dig into why this common pattern that many students fall into is such a problem. And then finally, I'm going to point you in the direction of some really helpful, constructive ways that we can use AI when we study and we seek to interpret what the Bible is saying. So first, here's the example. In the autumn, I teach an Old Testament module, and we begin the module by looking at the story of Abraham and the promise that God gave to Abraham that through him and through his family, blessing and salvation would come to all the families of the earth. And from this promise that Abraham received, there really are two themes that we discuss in detail. One is the idea of particularity. And in the context of the Old Testament, particularity refers to this idea that it is through Abraham, it is through his family, and only through his family. And a second theme that emerges is this idea that the promise given to Abraham is not just for his family alone. It is really for all people everywhere across all generations. And so these ideas of particularity and universality are essential to our understanding of what's really going on in the Old Testament. What we find is that the authors of the Old Testament were not polytheists. They did not believe in many gods, and they didn't believe that the God of Israel was just one God among many. They believed that their God was the only true God. And they were not pluralists, that they didn't believe that there were many paths that led to this knowledge of God, that somehow, some way that all of the other gods that were being worshipped among the nations were just different paths leading to the same God that Israel worshipped. In today's world, many people view this as being very problematic. They view it as being intolerant. They view it as being exclusivistic. And so those of us who study the Old Testament really have to reconcile this problem. How are we going to deal with people? How are we going to respond to people who argue that the Hebrew Scriptures promote intolerance or hatred or fear of people who are different, or perhaps even racism? Now, this is a question that I want my students to struggle with. I want them to dig into their own tradition, to their own understanding, to their own reading of the Scripture to come up with an answer. How are you going to resolve this tension? Because it has really important implications about the way that we read the entire Old Testament. So what I do in my Old Testament module is I present this idea of particularity, I present this idea of universality, and then I ask the students to think about how will you respond to somebody who says that the Bible is the basis of intolerance or exclusivity or fear of people who are different. So that's the example of what I'm doing in my module. Now, what I want to do next is I want to show you the worst case scenario of how AI can be abused in our coursework. Okay, so I have switched cameras here, and my goal is to show you what it looks like on the screen as I'm going to be illustrating this worst case scenario of how students are using AI. So let's begin by looking at this forum that I've set up for my students. And here it is, where I present this idea of particularity, and I present the issue of universality. And then I ask the students to think about how they're going to respond to somebody who argues that the Hebrew Scriptures promote intolerance, hatred, or xenophobia and racism. Now, here is an easy way to cheat using AI. I'm just going to highlight the text there, and I'm going to copy it. Then I am going to switch over to ChatGPT, and I'm just going to paste in that question, and I'm going to put at the end, answer in 300 words. Okay, so I've typed it in, I push go, and voila, ChatGPT starts whipping out an answer. So I'm going to wait for the answer. Okay, so now I have my answer, and I'm just going to click on here, copy, and then I'm going to go back to the forum. There I am, share. Okay, here I am back in the forum. I'm going to add a discussion topic, and I'm going to call this David Clark's very original and unique reply. And I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to go paste, and there it is. Okay, so I've shown you how easy it can be to use ChatGPT just to get an answer to a difficult question. Now, the third thing that I want to talk about is, why is this a problem? Well, the first thing that I will point out as a tutor, as a teacher, is that this is cheating. That when you just go onto an AI site like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, and you get information and you copy that text and you paste it into a paper, or you paste it into a forum, that's cheating. You can't do that unless you acknowledge that this material is taken from an AI generator. So you could do something like, okay, this is what I found when I typed in the answer to ChatGPT, and then you can have a little block quotation there. But to present something completely generated by AI and to give your tutor and your peers in the module the impression that this is your thinking and these are your words, that's academic misconduct. We cannot do that at university. But really, I think the more important issue is that you have let AI do the thinking for you. You are letting AI be the master. Now, a common term that's used to describe this process is offloading. And what offloading means is that you're not doing the task of a student. You're not digging in to think, to research, to reason, to critically engage and come up with your own response. You're just using an online tool to do all that work for you. And that is absolutely contrary to the reasons that you have come to university. Now, what we have to understand is that in a university setting, your tutors are not so much interested in hearing the right answers, quote unquote, as they are interested in hearing your answers. A lot of times students just think, oh, well, if I've posted the right answer, if I've given a good response, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that, again, we are not here to just hear the right answers. We are here to teach you how to think, how to reason, how to work through difficult issues. And so when you're going to do your work, you have to resist that temptation, okay? ChatGPT, Google Gemini, all these different resources are just temptations waiting in front of us. They're shortcuts, they're easy paths. And if you fall into that temptation of just doing the quickest, easiest route to finding the quote-unquote right answer, that again is defeating the entire purpose of why you have come to university. You are in university to develop your knowledge, to develop your skills, to develop your confidence as a student of the Bible. And when you rely on AI tools just as a crutch, as the source of information, as your master, you will never develop the skills and the knowledge and the confidence that you need to move ahead in life. And so, as a fourth point today, I want to give you some ideas on how we can helpfully and constructively use AI tools to assist us in our study of the Bible and to help us engage with difficult questions. The first rule is this: when you are faced with a difficult question, resist the temptation of just going to AI for the answer. Don't do it. Stop, think, process it, reason it through, take down notes. Then, if you need some help, if you are needing some additional support or an assistance in developing your answer, you can go to AI to get some of that support as a companion. So for example, you might open up ChatGPT and you might say, I'm having a difficult time understanding this idea of particularity in the Old Testament. Can you explain this to me more thoroughly? Or you might go into ChatGPT and say, I really need some more information about this idea of universality. What did it mean when God said to Abraham that through his family, through his descendants, all the families of the earth would be blessed? And so AI can be a really good source of developing that knowledge and that information that you need to develop and to formulate your own answer. But the key difference is that you are the one giving the answer. AI is the servant. AI is the one who is supporting you as you wrestle and respond to a difficult question. And that is our session for today. And so what we've looked at is an example of a difficult question that emerges from our study of the Old Testament. I've shown you the worst case scenario of how students might abuse AI in doing their coursework and in studying the Bible. And I've demonstrated what the problem is. First, it's cheating. And second, it's offloading. You're just letting a computer do your thinking for you. And finally, I've given you some suggestions about how we can authentically use AI as the servant to help us, to assist us, and to be a companion in the work that we have to do ourselves.